The moment his teeth sank into another woman's throat, Lyra felt it as if he had marked her instead. Pain struck deep, sudden and intimate, carving through her collarbone with brutal precision. Her hand flew to her skin, fingers pressing hard, as if she could hold herself together through force alone. The sensation wasn't imagined. It burned, sharp and invasive, like something inside her had been claimed without permission. The clearing erupted. Cheers rose instantly, loud and proud, wolves stepping forward to witness the moment their alpha king sealed his future. Firelight flickered across faces filled with approval, loyalty, expectation. At the center, Chael Draven didn't hesitate. He held Seraphine steady as the mark sealed into her throat. His grip was controlled, certain, final. He didn't look around. He didn't search the crowd. He chose. And Lyra's body paid for it. Her breath turned shallow, uneven as the bond twisted violently inside her, dragging every second of the marking into her own skin. The pain didn't stay on the surface. It sank deeper, wrapping around her ribs, tightening with a force that made standing feel like a decision instead of instinct. A broken sound caught in her throat before she swallowed it down. No one noticed, no one looked. Why would they? All attention belonged to the Alpha and the Luna he had just claimed. Lyra stood at the edge of it, invisible. Her knees weakened for a fraction of a second, but she forced them steady, locking herself into place. She refused to fall here. Not in front of this. Not for him. Chael pulled back slowly, already composed, already distant, as if what he had just done belonged to duty instead of desire. Seraphine's fingers brushed her throat, her shock melting into something brighter. She looked chosen. Lyra felt erased. A quiet voice rose nearby, filled with admiration. "That's what it looks like when an Alpha King claims his Luna." Lyra swallowed. She knew what it felt like. She was still feeling it. Her fingers pressed harder into her collarbone as the bond pulsed again, refusing to release her from something that was never meant to belong to her. "He didn't choose you." The thought settled, cold, unavoidable, and still the connection remained. Chael's gaze lifted, scanning the crowd with quiet authority. It passed over her, didn't stop, didn't recognize. That was when everything inside her broke. Not when he marked another woman, not when the pain hit. When he looked at her and saw nothing. A slow breath left her lungs, controlled despite the storm inside her. Something shifted then, settling into place with a clarity that cut deeper than pain. "You don't get to break me and still keep me," she whispered. No one heard. Good. This wasn't for them. She stepped back once, then again, still unnoticed. The pain sharpened. "You chose her," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on him one last time. "So I choose me." This time, she turned. The bond pulled hard, resisting, tightening, refusing to let go. She ignored it. She didn't look back. Behind her, the pack celebrated. Ahead, the forest opened, and for the first time, Lyra walked away without asking permission. Chapter 1. The Alpha Who Noticed Too Late. Chael felt the absence before he understood it. The clearing still pulsed with celebration, voices rising, approval echoing through the night as the bond sealed between him and Seraphine. Everything aligned exactly as it should have. The pack stood united, stability secured, power reinforced. Yet something beneath that order shifted. His gaze moved across the crowd again, slower this time, more deliberate. Every face held its place, every scent aligned, except one, Lyra. The absence didn't feel random. It felt intentional. The moment he recognized it, the bond reacted, not with completion, but with tension that refused to settle. Chael stilled internally. Seraphine's voice reached him, warm with certainty. "By morning the entire territory will know." He heard her. He didn't answer, because something had already shifted. "Who left?" he asked. The question came quiet, controlled, but it carried weight. The nearest guard straightened immediately. Lyra left shortly after the marking. That was enough. Kyle turned and stepped away without hesitation. He didn't look back. Chapter 2. She ran. He followed. Lyra didn't stop running. The forest swallowed her quickly, shadows closing around her as the sounds of the pack faded into distance. Branches scraped against her arms. Roots shifted beneath her feet. But she kept moving, forcing space between herself and the moment that refused to release her. The bond tightened. It didn't weaken with distance, it followed. Her breath sharpened as she pushed forward, faster now, not in panic but in decision. Distance wasn't escape, it was resistance. He won't stop. The thought settled clean. Behind her, Kyle moved, not chasing wildly, closing with precision. The forest adjusted to him, and the bond led him straight to her. Chapter 3. He found her. Lyra felt him before she heard him. The bond tightened without warning, a sharp pull beneath her ribs that disrupted her rhythm and forced her breath to falter. She slowed for half a second, just enough to confirm it, just enough to understand the truth she had already accepted. He was close, too close. The forest no longer felt like protection. It felt like distance that was collapsing faster than she could create it. Her pace shifted immediately, no hesitation, no wasted motion. She cut sharply through denser terrain, letting branches scrape and thorns catch where smoother paths would have made her predictable. Every step carried intention now. Every direction held calculation. He wouldn't chase blindly. He would anticipate. That made him dangerous. The bond pulled again, stronger this time, reacting to his proximity with a clarity that refused to be ignored. It didn't feel stretched anymore. It felt aligned. He's reading me. The realization settled cold. Lyra changed direction again, breaking her own pattern before it could form, forcing her movement into something less predictable. She moved downhill, then angled sharply across uneven ground, her breathing steady despite the strain building in her legs. For a moment the pull weakened, just enough to feel like space. Hope flickered, then vanished. The bond snapped tight again, closer. Her chest tightened as she pushed harder, refusing to slow, refusing to give him the moment he needed to close the distance. "You don't get to find me this easily," she murmured under her breath. But the forest didn't answer. The bond did. Closer. Kyle adjusted the moment she did. Her movement had shifted again, less linear now, more aggressive in its unpredictability. She wasn't running blindly. She was thinking, adapting, breaking patterns before they formed. Good. That gave him something to work with. He didn't follow her path. He cut across it. His pace remained controlled, precise, each step aligned with the awareness sharpening through the bond. It didn't guide him loosely. It showed him exactly where she would be. "She's trying to disappear," he said quietly. It didn't matter. She couldn't. The bond surged again, stronger, clearer, and this time it revealed something else. Hesitation. A fraction of a second. That was enough. Kyle shifted direction instantly, his movement tightening, his focus narrowing until everything else fell away. Lyra felt it. Not as sound, as presence. The shift hit before she could react, the bond tightening violently as something behind her closed faster than expected. Her foot slipped against loose ground, her balance shifting just enough to break her rhythm. She caught herself against a tree, breath breaking harder now. Too close. She pushed forward again, forcing her body to respond despite the strain, cutting uphill where the terrain turned sharper, the climb forcing effort into every movement. The bond pulsed, right behind her. Her chest tightened. "You don't get to do this," she whispered, her voice unsteady for the first time. "You don't get to chase me after choosing someone else." The words didn't slow him. Nothing would. Kyle reached her before she could move again. His hand closed around her arm, firm and controlled. stopping her momentum without force but with certainty. The contact sent a sharp surge through the bond, stronger than anything before, forcing both of them into full awareness of the connection they had tried to define and deny. Lyra's breath shattered. She twisted instinctively, pulling against his hold, but he didn't let go. He stepped closer, grounding her movement, turning escape into confrontation in a single motion. Running isn't going to end this. His voice came low, steady, but something beneath it had changed. Edge. Lyra turned fully toward him, her chest rising and falling harder now, the control she had held beginning to slip under the intensity of the moment. "Neither is chasing me." The words came sharp, cutting through the space between them. The bond tightened violently, reacting to proximity, to contact, to everything neither of them could ignore anymore. Kyle didn't release her. His grip shifted slightly, steadying rather than restraining, anchoring her there as his gaze locked onto hers with a focus that left no room for distance. "You ran," he said. Lyra's jaw tightened. "You marked her." The words hit harder, because they still carried weight, because they always would. The bond surged again, reacting to both truths colliding without resolution. Kyle stepped closer, closing what little space remained, his presence overwhelming, controlled but unrelenting. "And you still feel this?" The statement came quieter, more dangerous. Lyra's breath caught, and this time she didn't hide it. "Don't twist this into something it's not," she said, her voice tightening, emotion breaking through despite her control. "I felt it because you broke something, not because I belong to you." The words landed, and for a moment, Kyle didn't respond, because this time he understood the difference. The bond tightened again, not pulling them apart, pulling them closer. Kyle's gaze didn't leave hers as something in him settled into place with dangerous clarity. "You can call it broken," he said quietly, a pause. Then, "But you're still the one I came back for." The words hit hard, because they weren't controlled anymore. They were personal, and Lyra, for the first time since she ran, didn't know how to answer. Chapter 4. The Collision. "You're still the one I came back for." The words settled into her with a weight that refused to pass. Lyra felt the bond react instantly, tightening beneath her skin with a pull that no longer felt distant or fractured. It pressed inward, forcing awareness, forcing truth into a place she had already decided to close. Her breath steadied through effort. "That doesn't matter anymore," she said. Her voice held, but something beneath it strained against the control she forced into place. Kyle didn't release her arm. His grip remained steady, not harsh, but absolute enough to anchor her in the moment. His gaze held hers with a focus that stripped away everything unnecessary, everything that could be used to avoid what stood between them. "It matters now," he said. The tone stayed low. That made it heavier. Lyra's eyes sharpened, something fierce breaking through the quiet restraint she had carried for too long. "It mattered before," she said. "It mattered when you had a choice." The words struck clean. The bond reacted sharply, tightening again as if it refused to let either of them step past what had just been said. Kyle felt it fully. This time, he didn't push past it. "I made that choice without understanding what it would cost," he said. Lyra let out a breath that carried something raw. "And I paid for it anyway." The answer came without hesitation, because she had, because she still was. The bond surged again, reacting to the truth between them, tightening until the space they stood in felt smaller than it should. Kyle stepped closer, not to dominate, to remove distance. "I'm not asking you to forget it," he said. Lyra's gaze didn't soften. "You don't get to ask me for anything." The words cut, not loud, not uncontrolled, but precise enough to land exactly where they were meant to. For a moment Kyle didn't respond, because this time she wasn't reacting. She was refusing. That difference shifted something inside him. Chapter 5. The Line She Draws. The silence between them held, charged and unstable, the bond tightening with a force that refused to settle into anything predictable. Lyra pulled her arm free. The movement wasn't violent, it was deliberate. It mattered more because of that. She stepped back, creating space where there had been none, her breathing steady again, her control returning in layers that locked into place with quiet precision. "You don't get to come after me like this fixes anything," she said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Kyle watched her closely, his expression unchanged, but something beneath it had sharpened, something that no longer aligned with the distance he had held before. "I didn't come after you to fix it," he said. Lyra's eyes narrowed slightly. "Then what did you come for?" The question came fast, demanding, and this time he didn't hesitate. "You." The answer landed without space for interpretation. The bond reacted instantly, tightening with a force that made Lyra's breath catch despite her control. Her jaw tightened. "That's not enough," she said. The words came quieter now, but heavier. "Not after what you did." Kyle stepped forward again, but this time he stopped before closing the distance completely. The restraint in the movement carried more weight than force ever could. "You think this started tonight," he said. Lyra held his gaze. "It ended tonight." The correction came sharp, clear, but the bond rejected it. Kyle felt that rejection as clearly as she did. "No," he said, his voice steady, grounded in something that had moved past assumption. "You felt this before I mocked her." Lyra didn't answer immediately, because the truth in that pressed too close. Her silence stretched, and that silence confirmed it. Kyle's gaze darkened slightly. "You knew," he continued. "You felt it before I did." Lyra exhaled slowly, something in her expression shifting, not into weakness, but into something colder. "And you still chose her." The words landed. Final. Because that was the part that mattered. The bond surged again, reacting to the fracture between them, to the truth neither of them could rewrite. Kyle didn't deny it. He stepped closer again, removing the last of the space she had created, forcing the moment back into something immediate. "I chose the pack," he said. Lyra's lips curved faintly. No humor, just clarity, and I learned exactly where that leaves me. Chapter 6. The Shift. The air between them changed, not gradually, decisively. Kyle felt it first, as something settling into place, something that no longer allowed him to stand at a distance from what this was. The bond didn't feel unstable anymore. It felt directed toward her. Lyra felt it too, that shift, that alignment. And it unsettled her more than anything else had. "You don't get to rewrite this because you finally noticed," she said. The words came controlled, but they carried something deeper now, something closer to breaking through. Kyle's gaze didn't waver. "This isn't rewriting anything," he said. "This is finishing something you tried to walk away from." The words struck, because they carried recognition. Lyra's breath slowed, her control tightening as she forced herself to hold his gaze. "I didn't leave anything unfinished," she said. Her voice steadied. "I ended it." The bond reacted sharply, tightening with a force that rejected the finality in her words. Kyle felt it, understood it, and this time, he didn't let her define it. "You left before you understood it," he said. Lyra's eyes sharpened. "I understood enough." The answer came immediately, because for her, that was the truth that mattered. Kyle stepped closer again, forcing the tension between them into something that couldn't remain distant. "You understood what I did," he said. A pause. "Then, You didn't understand what it meant. The words settled deeper. Lyra's breath caught, just for a second, then steadied. Then say it, she said. The challenge came quieter, more dangerous. Say what it meant. Kyle didn't look away, because now he knew. That Mark binds the pack, he said. The words came measured. But it doesn't replace this. The bond surged sharply, reacting instantly, confirming what he had just said in a way neither of them could ignore. Lyra felt it, and this time it hit harder, because it didn't feel like something breaking. It felt like something refusing to end. Her breath caught again. This time she didn't hide it. You don't get to separate them, she said. The words came tighter now, less controlled. Kyle's gaze held hers. I already have. The bond snapped tight. Not unstable, not breaking, claiming. Lyra felt it fully this time, the connection no longer distant, no longer something she could dismiss as pain or confusion. Her gaze stayed locked on his. But something in it shifted, not surrender, something more dangerous. You don't get to decide that after you marked someone else, she said quietly. The words landed. And this time, Kyle didn't correct her, because now he knew exactly what he was willing to risk. Chapter 7. The claim he didn't release. You don't get to decide that after you marked someone else. Lyra's voice stayed steady, but the bond reacted as if it rejected the words entirely. The pull beneath her ribs tightened, sharper now, no longer confused, no longer fractured. It carried direction, and that direction still pointed at him. Kyle didn't answer immediately. He studied her, not as alpha, not as command, as something far more focused. You're still reacting to me, he said. The observation landed quietly, but it cut through everything she had just said. Lyra's jaw tightened. I'm reacting to what you did. The correction came clean, controlled, but the bond surged again, exposing the difference between intention and truth. Kyle stepped closer, closing the space she had tried to hold. His presence pressed into hers, not aggressive, not rushed, but inevitable. You felt it when I marked her, he said. You feel this now. Lyra held his gaze, forcing her breathing into control. That doesn't make it yours. The answer came sharper this time, but the bond tightened again, refusing to align with her words. Kyle's hand moved, slower now, deliberate, brushing lightly against her wrist before settling there, not restraining but grounding. You think this started tonight, he said. Lyra didn't answer. Her silence held tension. He stepped closer again, his voice lowering, carrying something more dangerous than authority. It didn't. The words sank deeper than anything else, because they reached backward, into everything she had ignored. Lyra exhaled slowly, her control tightening. That doesn't change what you chose. The truth landed. Solid. Kyle didn't deny it. Instead, he moved closer until there was no distance left between them, forcing the moment into something neither of them could step away from. You think that Mark ends this, he said. Lyra's eyes sharpened. I know it does. The certainty in her voice held, but the bond rejected it instantly, tightening with a force that pulled harder instead of breaking. Kyle felt it, understood it. That Mark binds the pack, he said. It doesn't decide this. Lyra's breath faltered for a fraction of a second. You already made your decision. Her voice tightened. Kyle's gaze locked onto hers. I made one decision, he said. A pause, then. I'm making another. The shift landed, not just in words, in the bond. Lyra felt it. Chapter 8. When the Luna arrives. The bond shifted, not between them, beyond them. Lyra felt it first as a sharp disturbance beneath everything else, something foreign pushing into the connection, stretching it wider than it should have gone. Her expression changed. Kyle noticed instantly. What is it? Lyra didn't look away from him. She felt you leave. The words came quiet, certain. Kyle gaze darkened. Seraphine. The lunar bond had formed, and now it was pulling, demanding. Lyra stepped back, breaking the proximity, her voice sharpening with urgency. You need to go back. Kyle didn't move. I'm not leaving. The answer came immediate, uncompromising. Lyra's frustration broke through. This isn't about what you want. You marked her. That bond doesn't disappear because you decided I matter now. The words struck harder, because they carried truth. The bond surged violently, reacting to both realities at once. Kyle stepped forward again, closing distance she tried to create. You matter now, because you always did. Lyra shook her head, something in her finally breaking through control. Then you should have chosen me. The words came out before she could stop them. Silence followed, sharp, heavy, because now there was no denial left. The forest shifted, not from them, from what was coming. Lyra felt the movement first, fast, direct, cutting through the trees with purpose. Seraphine stepped into the clearing. The mark at her throat burned dark and fresh, the symbol of claim and power unmistakable. Her gaze moved immediately to Lyra, not confused, not uncertain, focused. So this is where you went? Her voice came calm, too calm. Lyra held her ground. You shouldn't be here. Seraphine's lips curved slightly. And you should. The tension sharpened instantly. The bond reacted, pulling tighter across all three of them, no longer contained. Kyle stepped between them, his presence grounding the moment, but it didn't resolve anything. What are you doing here? He asked. Seraphine didn't look away from Lyra. I followed what you left behind. The words carried no softness, only truth. Kyle's jaw tightened slightly. You should have stayed. Seraphine's gaze snapped to him. And you should have come back. The words struck, because they carried expectation, because they carried claim. The bond between them reacted, but it didn't settle cleanly. It strained. Lyra saw it, felt it, understood it. Chapter 9. The pack sees everything. The forest didn't stay silent. Movement surged through the trees behind them, fast and organized. Wolves emerged from the shadows. Warriors first, then others, drawn by the shift in power they could no longer ignore. The pack had followed, and now they saw everything. The Alpha, the Lunar, and the woman standing between them. Silence fell, heavy, unavoidable. An elder stepped forward, voice tight with restraint. Alpha, this needs to be addressed. Kyle didn't turn fully, but his presence shifted. Authority settled. It will be. The words carried weight, but they didn't close the tension. They deepened it. Lyra felt every gaze settle on her, judging, measuring, waiting. This was the moment she could step back, disappear again, let the structure close over what didn't fit. She didn't. She stepped forward. The movement was small, but it shifted everything. I'm not staying in a place where I have to fight for something that should have been mine without a war, she said. Her voice carried, clear, unshaken. The words cut through the pack, exposing something none of them wanted to say aloud. Seraphine's gaze sharpened. You speak as if you were ever meant to stand beside him. Lyra didn't hesitate. I was never meant to beg for it. The answer landed, hard, and this time the pack felt it. Kyle stepped forward, fully. No distance, no hesitation, enough. The word didn't silence them by force. It settled because it had to. His gaze moved across the gathered wolves, then returned to Lyra. And this time, he didn't hold back. I chose wrong. The words hit like impact. Shock rippled through the pack. Seraphine stilled completely. Lyra didn't move. But something inside her shifted, not toward him, toward the weight of what he had just done. Kyle's voice remained steady. I chose what secured the pack, he said, and ignored what would break it. A pause. Then, I ignored her. Silence followed. Heavy, absolute, because now there was no denial left. The bond snapped tight across all three of them, not balanced, not stable, demanding resolution. Seraphine's gaze returned to Lyra, something darker settling beneath the surface. You're the problem. The words came quiet, but final. Lyra held her gaze. Then fix it. The challenge landed, sharp, uncompromising, and in that moment, the forest, the pack, the bonds, everything shifted toward one truth. This wasn't conflict anymore. This was war. Chapter 10. The first strike, then fix it. The words didn't fade, they landed. Lyra felt the shift before anything moved, the bond tightening sharply as if it understood what was about to happen before the first step was taken. The forest stilled around them, tension gathering into something that pressed against the skin. Seraphine moved, not impulsively, with intention. Power rose through her in a controlled surge, the fresh mark at her throat darkening as the Lunabond responded to her will. It didn't lash out wildly. It aligned behind her, structured, reinforced by everything the pack had just witnessed hours ago. Authority. Claim. Right. You don't understand what you've stepped into, Seraphine said. Her voice carried across the clearing, steady enough to reach the wolves watching from the edges, steady enough to turn this into something larger than a personal dispute. Lyra didn't step back. I understand exactly what this is, she replied. You just don't like the answer. The air tightened. That was enough. Seraphine closed the distance in a single, controlled movement, her strike aimed with precision, her intent clear. End the disruption before it spreads. She didn't reach Lyra. Kyle stepped in. His movement cut through the moment with absolute certainty, his hand catching Seraphine's wrist mid-strike, redirecting her force without struggle. The impact echoed through the bond, sharp and destabilizing, forcing every wolf present to feel the shift. Enough. The word settled low. Final. Seraphine stilled in his hold, her gaze lifting to his, something sharp breaking through her control. You're stopping me. The words came quieter now. Dangerous. Kyle didn't release her immediately. That wasn't a request. His tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. Lyra felt the shift settle fully, not implied, not uncertain. He had chosen where to stand. Seraphine felt it too. Her expression hardened, something colder replacing the certainty she had carried into the clearing. You're choosing her, she said. The accusation didn't rise. It settled into truth. Kyle's grip tightened slightly, anchoring the moment. I'm stopping you. The distinction didn't soften the impact. That's the same thing. The bond snapped tighter across all three of them, reacting violently to the fracture, pulling in directions that refused to align. Lyra felt it surge through her, and this time, something inside her answered. Chapter 11. The bond breaks open. The pressure didn't stay external, it turned inward. Lyra's breath caught as something shifted beneath her ribs, the bond tightening in a way that felt different from before. It no longer dragged her toward him. It pressed outward, as if something within her had finally reached the point where it refused to stay contained. Kyle felt it immediately. His attention snapped to her, his grip on Seraphine loosening just enough for the moment to tilt. Lyra. He didn't finish, because the change didn't wait. The air around her shifted, subtle but undeniable. The forest reacted first, the quiet deepening as if something older than the pack itself had recognized her. The ground seemed to hold still beneath her feet, the night pressing closer instead of receding. Seraphine felt it next. Her posture faltered just enough to reveal something she hadn't expected. "What is that?" The question slipped out sharper than intended. Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't. The bond surged again, but this time it didn't feel like something tying her to him. It felt like something unlocking. Her hand pressed briefly against her chest, her breathing uneven for a single moment before it steadied again, deeper now, stronger. Kyle stepped closer instinctively, his focus locking onto her with a precision that excluded everything else. "Stay with me," he said. The words came low, grounding. Lyra lifted her gaze, and something in it had changed. The pain remained, the fracture, the anger. But beneath it, there was clarity, strength, something that hadn't been there before. "I'm not breaking," she said quietly. The words settled, and the bond aligned. Seraphine took a step back, small, but it mattered, because now she understood. This wasn't just connection. This was something else, something that didn't belong to her, didn't belong to the structure she had just been placed at the center of. "This shouldn't exist," she said. Her voice carried less certainty now. Lyra held her gaze. "It does." Chapter 12. The pack fractures. The wolves at the edge of the clearing shifted. What had begun as observation turned into uncertainty, then into something sharper. Whispers moved through them, quiet at first, then spreading as realization took hold. This wasn't a contained conflict. This was a structural failure. An elder stepped forward again, more urgent now. "Alpha, this is destabilizing the pack." Kyle didn't look away from Lyra. "I'm aware." The answer came steady, unmoved. That unsettled them more than denial would have. Seraphine's gaze returned to him, sharper now, recalculating. "You would let this stand?" she asked. Kyle turned to her fully this time. "Yes." The word didn't hesitate. Shock rippled outward, because now he wasn't containing it, he was allowing it. Lyra felt every eye settle on her again, but this time it didn't carry the same weight. It didn't press her backward. It sharpened her presence instead. She stepped forward again, deliberate. "I'm not something that disrupts your order," she said. "I'm the part of it you ignored until it broke." The words cut through the gathering. Not loud, but undeniable. Kyle's gaze shifted back to her, something in it tightening, not with resistance, but with recognition. Seraphine's composure hardened again. "You think that gives you a place here," she said. Lyra didn't hesitate. "It means I was always part of it." The bond surged again, reacting to the truth between them, no longer unstable. Revealing. Chapter 13. War declared. The tension reached its edge. Seraphine stepped forward again, slower this time, controlled, but carrying something far more dangerous than before. "If this stands," she said, her voice lowering, carrying across the pack with cold clarity, "then everything we just secured fractures." Kyle didn't move. "Then it wasn't stable to begin with." The answer landed. Heavy, irreversible. Seraphine studied him for a long moment, something calculating settling behind her gaze. "This doesn't end here," she said. The statement carried no emotion, only certainty. Lyra held her gaze. "I know." The response came just as steady. That was the moment it shifted fully. Not tension, not conflict, war. The bond tightened across all three of them, no longer contained, no longer balanced, pulling towards something that would not resolve without consequence. Kyle stepped forward, positioning himself beside Lyra. Not in front, beside. That choice, that placement, said everything. The pack felt it. Seraphine saw it, and this time, she didn't try to stop it. She stepped back, not in retreat, in strategy. Then we'll see what survives it, she said quietly. The forest didn't feel like territory anymore. It felt like ground that would be fought over. Lyra stood her position, the bond steady now, no longer pulling her in confusion. It connected, it revealed, it waited. Kyle didn't look away from her. I won't let this destroy you, he said. Lyra's gaze held his. You don't get to decide that either. The word settled, sharp, true, and this time he didn't argue, because now they were both part of something that couldn't be controlled, only survived. Chapter 14. The night the Alpha broke his own law. The clearing did not empty after Seraphine stepped back. That would have been too easy. The wolves remained where they were, some rigid with loyalty, some visibly shaken, all of them caught between what they had always known and what had just happened in front of them. Firelight from the distant celebration still stained the edges of the forest in dull gold, but it no longer looked like celebration. It looked like the remains of something that had already burned through itself. Kyle felt every eye on him. He had worn that weight for years. He understood the shape of expectation better than any wolf standing there. He knew how authority should move, how leadership should speak, how an Alpha King was meant to close a fracture before it became visible. Tonight he had done the opposite. He had stepped into it. He had chosen where to stand. And now the entire pack was waiting to see whether he would deny what they had just witnessed, or make the unforgivable worse by naming it aloud. Lyra stood beside him, not behind him, not within his shadow, and that mattered more than any speech he could give. He could feel the change in her through the bond, no longer jagged in the way it had been at the beginning of the night. The pain remained. The betrayal remained. But beneath both, something stronger had taken root. She was no longer simply enduring the moment, she was standing inside it. That unsettled him in ways he did not show. An elder stepped forward again, this time without the caution of someone seeking permission. Age had stripped him of fear and polished him into bluntness. Alpha, he said, voice carrying enough to still the whispers gathering along the edges of the clearing. This cannot remain unresolved. The Luna has been marked. The pack witnessed it. The alliance has already been sealed. Kyle looked at him fully. Then perhaps the alliance should have been built on something stronger than appearance. The words landed like a strike. Several wolves stiffened. One of the younger warriors actually looked at Seraphine before he caught himself, as though the thought had moved through him before discipline could stop it. Seraphine noticed. Of course she did. She stood with perfect posture, the mark on her throat dark against her skin, the visible symbol of everything the pack had just celebrated. She had regained her stillness, but Kyle knew enough about people who held power carefully to recognize the danger in her composure. She was not retreating into hurt, she was reorganizing it. When she spoke, her voice carried beautifully. That, more than anger, made it dangerous. You are speaking as if this is a private disagreement, she said. It is not. You marked me before the pack. You gave them a Luna. You tied your authority to mine. You tied mine to theirs. If you make a spectacle of undoing that tonight, you do not merely embarrass me. You weaken every promise this territory rests on. Kyle heard the intelligence in it, so did everyone else. This was why she had been chosen. She understood structure. She knew how to turn perception into pressure and duty into leverage. In another life, another version of the night, he might have admired it. But admiration was not the problem. Lyra said nothing, yet the bond sharpened around that silence, and Kyle knew without looking that she had heard the deeper meaning in Seraphine's words. She was being reduced again, not named as a rival, not even as a person. She was being framed as chaos, as error, as threat. He had allowed that kind of silence before. Not tonight. This is not spectacle, he said, and his voice changed the air. Wolves who had begun to shift stilled where they stood. "This is consequence." Seraphine's gaze hardened. "Consequence for whom?" Kyle did not answer immediately, because the answer had already moved through him and settled into something he could no longer evade. When he spoke, he made no effort to soften it. For me, that struck harder than if he had named anyone else, because now the pack understood what he was doing. He was not merely defending Lyra, he was placing the failure inside himself and forcing the pack to see it there. An alpha, who named his own error in front of his wolves, did one of two things. He either lost them, or he bound them more deeply because the truth had become harder to deny than loyalty. Lyra turned her head slightly then, finally looking at him fully instead of at the wolves or at Seraphine. He felt the movement like a shift in the current of the bond. Her gaze was unreadable at first, then it sharpened with something quieter and more dangerous than anger. "You do not get to save me by destroying yourself in public," she said. The words were soft enough that only those nearest heard them, but the bond carried them through him with brutal clarity. Kyle looked back at her. "This is not about saving you." Lyra's expression barely changed, but he knew her well enough now, too late perhaps, but well enough, to feel the edge beneath her stillness. "Then what is it about?" He held her gaze a second too long, and in that second, the answer became visible even before he spoke it. "It is about refusing to lie any further." The bond tightened. Lyra inhaled slowly, and he knew she had not expected that. The elder stepped forward again, pressing because the moment demanded a structure, and he could not bear the absence of one. "Then speak plainly, Alpha. Are you rejecting the Luna?" Seraphine's head turned just enough to catch the question, and for the first time that night something fierce flashed across her face before she mastered it. She did not want the question asked publicly because she understood what public questions did. They created witnesses. Witnesses created memory. Memory hardened into law faster than blood. Kyle let the silence hold long enough to become unbearable. Then he said, "No." The clearing exhaled. Seraphine's shoulders did not visibly drop, but relief moved across the wolves nearest her like wind through leaves. And then Kyle continued, "I am rejecting the assumption that the mark settled everything." Relief died where it stood. Seraphine's expression went still again, but it was the stillness of someone who had just realized she was no longer standing on stable ground. The pack felt it too. Kyle could see it in the way their attention sharpened, in the way no one shifted now without thinking. Lyra did not look relieved. That mattered, because she understood before the others did that he was not offering resolution. He was widening the wound. "You are making this worse," she said quietly. He looked at her. "It was always worse than I allowed myself to see." That landed between them harder than anything else had, because it was not political and not strategic. It was intimate in the ugliest way. It admitted blindness. It admitted delay. It admitted that she had suffered inside something he could have named earlier and had not. Her jaw tightened, and the bond shivered with the force of what she did not say. Seraphine saw it. Her intelligence moved faster than most wolves' instincts, and she began to understand that brute opposition would fail here. Kyle had already moved too far into truth to be dragged back by image alone. So she changed tactics. She turned away from Lyra and addressed the wolves. "What he feels," she said, her voice controlled, almost mournful, "does not change what stands in front of us. A pack cannot be ruled through divided bonds. A king cannot fracture his household and expect the territory to remain untouched. If he insists on carrying unresolved claims into the center of this pack, then every enemy beyond these trees will smell weakness before dawn." That was clever. It did what accusation could not. It made Lyra an external problem. It invited fear. It shifted the question away from love or betrayal and toward survival. Several warriors reacted instantly. Kyle saw it in the lift of their shoulders, in the way they looked not at him but outward, toward borders, neighboring packs, old rivalries. War had entered the clearing before the first order was given, and Lyra felt it. He knew because the bond changed again, not inward this time but outward, wider, as if whatever had awakened in her was not limited to him at all. Her stillness deepened. The forest around them seemed to listen. Then she stepped forward, not toward Kyle, toward the pack. That alone stole the next breath from half the clearing, because Lyra had never moved like this in public. She had always carried herself with quiet competence, with the understated presence of someone who did not seek attention because she had learned too early that attention was rarely kind. Tonight she walked into the center of it willingly. "I am not your weakness," she said. No one interrupted. Even Seraphine did not, because the moment had gained a shape that demanded witness. Lyra's voice did not rise, yet it carried farther than it should have, as though the forest itself had decided not to swallow it. "You do not get to name me the crack in a structure that was already failing. You do not get to call me danger, because the truth arrived in a shape you do not control." The words moved through the wolves like fire finding dry roots underground, invisible at first, then impossible to miss. Seraphine's gaze sharpened, but Lyra didn't look at her now. She looked at the pack. "At the center of this is a simple thing," she said. "He chose duty over honesty. He chose stability over truth. That was his decision. My existence did not create it. His silence did." The elder stared at her with something like shock. Several of the younger wolves looked stricken because the thing she had just done was larger than defiance. She had placed the moral failure where it belonged, inside the seat of power, without begging to be excused by it. Kyle felt the impact of it in his own chest, and because he felt it, because he knew the pack did too, he made the decision that would later be remembered as the point where the old structure truly broke. He moved to stand beside her, not in front, not as shield, beside. The clearing changed around that choice. Seraphine saw it, and for the first time allowed some of the steel beneath her grace to show. "You are handing them a divided throne." Kyle's answer came without delay. "Then they will have to decide whether they want a throne built on lies." That was the moment the pack split. Not cleanly, not formally, but in the subtle, irreversible way real fracture begins, in glances, in breath, in whom a wolf turns toward when power grows unstable. Some looked at Seraphine because order still mattered, and she embodied it. Some looked at Kyle because authority, once embodied fully, is difficult to abandon even when it wounds. And some, fewer, but not as few as anyone had expected, looked at Lyra. She felt them. He knew she did. The bond widened again, and what had once been only pain between them had become something broader, more dangerous, something that seemed to listen not only to him, but to the currents of the territory itself. Seraphine felt that too. It changed her eyes. Not fear, calculation. She was too intelligent to panic publicly. Instead, she stepped back and let the clearing watch her become colder. "This will not end here," she said. Lyra finally looked at her. "No," she said, "it starts here." The simplicity of it hit harder than a threat. Kyle saw exactly what Seraphine saw. In that moment, Lyra was no longer merely the woman who had been overlooked. She was becoming the axis around which the unresolved truth of the pack would turn. That could not be tolerated by anyone who wanted the old order to survive unchanged. And because Seraphine understood power, she did not strike again. She withdrew, not from weakness, to prepare. When she turned and walked back toward the heart of the packlands, a cluster of wolves moved with her almost unconsciously. The old order had just found its center of resistance. The rest stayed. Kyle watched her go, then looked at the pack that remained. "No one speaks of this beyond the territory tonight," he said. One of the warriors, young enough to still confuse courage with speed, said, "They will know by morning anyway." Kyle turned his head slowly. "Then dawn will come with my words, not with your fear." The warrior lowered his gaze immediately. Orders began to move after that, sharp and disciplined, but the clearing had already changed too much for discipline to hide it. Scouts were redirected, elders summoned, inner circle wolves sent for. No one asked why Lyra was still standing beside him. That question had already answered itself. At last the clearing began to thin. The wolves withdrew in controlled waves, each one carrying the night away inside memory that would harden before sunrise. Lyra waited until the last of them disappeared before she spoke. "You should have let her hit me." Kyle turned to her, the night suddenly quieter without witnesses. "No." The answer came too quickly for strategy. Her gaze lifted to him. "That would have been easier." He looked at her for a long moment. "For whom?" Lyra gave a quiet, bitter breath. "For everyone." He stepped closer. Not enough to crowd, enough to refuse the distance she tried to make moral. "You are not everyone's sacrifice." The bond tightened, and he felt the exact second the words reached whatever new strength had awakened inside her. "It was easier when you didn't notice me," she said. That hit harder than accusation, because it came from a place too tired to perform anger well. Kyle absorbed it without looking away. It was simpler. Her mouth curved without humor. "That's a cruel word for what you did." "Yes," he said. The honesty of it startled them both. The bond shifted. It did not soften, but it changed. Not comfort, recognition. Lyra looked away first, toward the deeper forest. "If the pack turns against me, I won't stay to watch it." Kyle's voice lowered. "You won't leave alone." She looked back at him. "You don't get to decide that." He knew the shape of the argument already, knew how she would resist control even when the ground beneath them had become too unstable for freedom to be simple. So he did not argue. Instead he said, "Then decide it with me." That unsettled her more than command would have. Before she could answer, the bond jolted sharply in both of them. Seraphine, not near, not approaching, doing something. Kyle felt the nature of it almost instantly. She had gone to the inner circle. She had not retreated into grief. She had moved to secure law, loyalty, and narrative before Dawn could make the truth uncontrollable. Lyra saw it in his expression. What is she doing? Kyle's gaze shifted toward the heart of the Packlands, turning my silence into her weapon before I can speak. Lyra's own expression. The new force within her moved again, subtle but undeniable. "Then you're already late." Kyle looked at her. She was right. And this time, lateness would cost more than one woman's heartbreak. It would cost the entire shape of the territory. He held her gaze one moment longer, then said, "Come with me." Lyra's eyes hardened on instinct. "Into the center of the pack. After tonight?" "Yes." Her laugh was quiet and hard. "That sounds less like trust and more like execution. If I wanted you cornered, I would have done it before witnesses." The truth in that stripped the air between them down to nerve. She studied him, the bond taut and listening. Then, to his surprise and perhaps to hers, she said, "Fine." The word was not agreement, it was challenge, and he accepted it. They moved through the trees side by side, not touching, though the bond between them felt more present than skin. The Packlands opened ahead, in widening bands of torchlight and motion. Wolves were already awake beyond the celebration now, summoned by the shift in authority they had sensed before they understood it. As they approached the central grounds, Kyle saw at once that Seraphine had moved exactly as he expected. The council fire had been relit. The elders were gathered, Warriors ringed the central space in full view. She had not gone to sleep as a Luna, she had gone to war as one, and she was waiting for him. Chapter 15. The Council Fire. The central grounds had transformed in less than an hour. What had been celebration now resembled judgment. Torches burned higher than necessary, their light hard and gold against stone and packed earth. Elders occupied the raised semicircle near the council fire, their faces lined with fatigue and unease. Warriors stood around them in concentric ranks, forming not quite a wall and not quite an audience. The difference mattered. A wall implied defense, an audience implied decision. Tonight, the pack had become both. Seraphine stood at the center of it all, exactly where a Luna should stand if she intended to own the shape of the story before anyone else could. She had changed into a dark ceremonial cloak that left the mark visible at her throat, as if she understood the power of reminding every eye in the clearing that blood had already spoken publicly, whether the heart had or not. When Kyle and Lyra stepped into the torchlight together, the entire gathering shifted with a force so immediate it felt physical. No one gasped. The wolves who mattered had too much discipline for that. But silence struck the grounds like impact, and every head turned. Kyle did not slow, Lyra did. Only by a fraction. He felt it through the bond, the old instinct to disappear colliding with the new strength that refused to bend. She had spent years being overlooked. Walking beside him into the center of the pack after everything that had happened tonight was not just difficult. It was violent in a quieter way. He lowered his voice without looking at her. "You can leave now if you want," she answered with enough edge to draw blood. "If I leave now, they'll call it guilt. Then let them choke on disappointment." Her breath almost caught, almost. But she stayed. That mattered more than either of them said. An elder rose, old enough that the motion should have been slow, but tonight outrage sharpened him. "Alpha King," he said, voice carrying clearly across the grounds. "You stand before your council with a newly marked Luna present, and the cause of this unrest at your side." Lyra's spine straightened beside Kyle. He heard the phrase and stored it like a blade. Cause of this unrest. It was exactly the narrative Seraphine had wanted laid down first. Not Lyra's name, not her personhood, her function as disruption, her reduction into problem. Before Kyle could respond, Lyra did. "My name is Lyra Vale." The words cut through the elder's phrasing before it could settle permanently into the clearing. Every eye shifted to her. She stepped forward by half a pace, enough to claim the sound of her own name without forcing the movement into challenge. The strength in it came from precision. "If you are going to discuss me as if I am central to the fracture in your pack, then you can at least call me what I am." The elder stiffened. Several younger wolves looked startled, but Kale saw something else move through the council. Respect, reluctant and unwilling, but real. Wolves understood courage best when it came without embellishment. Seraphine did not look rattled. If anything, her gaze sharpened with appreciation for the danger Lyra posed when she stopped disappearing. "Very well," Seraphine said smoothly. "Lyra Vale, then. The woman my alpha left me to follow on the same night he marked me before this pack." The words landed cleanly because they contained no raised emotion. She did not need fury. Truth, arranged correctly, cut harder than rage. Murmurs moved through the gathered wolves. Kale stepped into them before they could spread. "I left because the matter was not finished." Seraphine's gaze turned to him, and for the first time there was something close to open contempt beneath the composure. "You marked me. That was supposed to mean something finished." The bond between them strained. Kale felt it clearly now, not absent, not broken, but structured in a way that resisted intimacy. It was a political bond given teeth and blood. It had force. It lacked center. Lyra felt that too. He knew she did because the bond between them tightened the moment Seraphine said "marked me," Not with jealousy exactly, but with the memory of pain and the knowledge that no truth spoken here could erase it. One of the council elders spoke next, his tone more cautious. "The pack requires clarity, Alpha. Is the Luna's place secure?" There it was. Not morality, not feeling, place. Kyle looked at the fire instead of at Seraphine, because flames had always made honesty easier. They were incapable of pretending to be anything other than what they consumed. "Her place," he said slowly, "depends on whether this pack wants security built on ritual alone or stability built on truth." The grounds stirred again. Seraphine stepped forward, her cloak shifting like shadow around her. "Do not make the mistake of turning your regret into philosophy. You chose me in front of them because you knew what leadership required." Kyle looked at her fully now. "I chose you because I believed the pack needed what you represented." "Needed," she repeated, the word soft and deadly. Past tense? He did not answer at once, and that was answer enough. The elders felt it. The warriors felt it. Lyra felt it. The entire territory might as well have leaned inward. Seraphine's control hardened, becoming something colder than grace. "Then say it clearly, Kyle. Say in front of your council that the woman you marked as Luna is now an inconvenience to a bond you ignored until it became impossible to deny." Lyra inhaled sharply beside him, not because the words were false, but because they were brutal in their precision. Kyle turned his head toward her. She did not look at him. Her gaze stayed fixed ahead, jaw tight, eyes steady in the way they always were when pain had moved too deep to display itself cleanly. He understood then that if he let Seraphine define this for the pack, Lyra would survive it. She had survived worse. But survival was no longer enough. Kyle stepped forward until he stood at the center of the firelight, squarely in view of every wolf gathered. "No," he said. The ground stilled. Then he continued, and his voice carried without effort, because wolves had always listened best when truth sounded like a wound opening. "She is not an inconvenience. She is the truth I ignored because I thought power could be arranged like stone and blood could be directed where it was most useful." He turned then, not toward Seraphine, toward Lyra. The clearing felt the shift and held its breath. "I was wrong." The word struck more violently than any roar could have. Lyra looked at him at last, and what he saw in her eyes did not resemble surrender or even hope. It resembled damage being seen too late. That was worse. Seraphine's face did not crumble. Kyle gave her that much respect. She did not break in public. But fury changed the architecture of her beauty. It took something elegant and sharpened it into purpose. "You are humiliating your Luna before the pack," she said. Kyle did not look away from Lyra when he answered. "No, I'm humiliating myself before the pack." That landed deeper because it removed the escape of righteous victimhood. If Seraphine attacked now, she would be attacking a man who had already placed the blade in his own ribs publicly. She knew it. So instead of anger, she used law. "You swore by blood," she said. "If you weaken the Luna bond publicly, rival territories will scent instability before dawn. Challenges will come. Border pacts will test us. The Council will be forced to choose whether this territory is still ruled by an alpha or by his guilt." A murmur moved through the elders. This was the real battlefield now. Kyle answered without delay. "Then let them come." That shook the grounds more than the confession had, because warriors understood what those words meant. It was not metaphor, it was readiness. Border tensions, old rivals, ambitious sub-alphas, every one of them would smell opportunity in divided leadership. Lyra turned fully toward him then. Her voice was low enough that only those closest heard it, but the bond carried it through him with lethal clarity. "You would risk war for this." He met her gaze. "I risked worse by pretending it was nothing." The bond tightened, and for the first time that night, the pain inside it began to take on another shape, not forgiveness, nothing that easy, but something larger than immediate hurt. Something like the dangerous beginning of belief. Lyra seemed to feel it too, and it frightened her. Good, he thought grimly. It frightened him as well. Seraphine saw the moment between them and understood exactly how perilous it was. Her instincts were excellent. She no longer tried to cut Lyra out directly. Instead, she turned to the council. "If he speaks from guilt, this pack bleeds for it," she said. "If he speaks from truth, then he confesses he took a Luna in bad faith. Which law do you prefer to break first?" Smart. It forced the elders into legal fracture. They began speaking over one another. Blood law, territorial alliances, the sanctity of public marking, the authority of the Alpha King, the instability of divided bonds. The council fire stopped being symbolic and became what it had always been when power frayed, a furnace where the language of order was used to disguise fear. And through all of it, Lyra stood. She did not speak again immediately. She let the chaos rise. She let the pack reveal itself. Kyle felt the awakening inside her deepen, that strange widening force within the bond that had first surfaced in the forest. It responded to pressure not by collapsing, but by listening more intently. Then she moved. She walked to the center of the firelight where neither Kyle nor Seraphine stood, claiming ground that belonged to neither of them. The council noise died. That was the measure of how far the night had shifted. "If all of this rests on whether I exist quietly or visibly," she said, "then your structure was weak long before I said a word." No one interrupted. Her voice remained calm, but it had acquired a resonance now, something that seemed to travel through the firelit air differently from before. Even the warriors on the outer edge leaned subtly forward. "You are all trying to decide whether I am worth the damage my existence causes," she continued. "You are asking the wrong question. Ask instead why a pack can be shaken so completely by a truth one woman had to carry alone for years." The elder who had first called her unrest looked as though he had been struck. Seraphine, to her credit, did not attempt to belittle the point. She understood too much for that. Instead, she said, "Truth without structure becomes destruction." Lyra met her gaze. "Then perhaps destruction is what weak structures deserve." That did it. The force inside her broke fully open. It was not dramatic at first. No lightning split the sky. No wolf roared. The council fire only slightly, but enough that every wolf in the clearing saw the flames lean toward her. Silence dropped so hard it felt physical. Kyle felt the power through the bond before he saw the fire move. It did not belong to him. It did not belong to the Luna bond. It did not feel pack-born at all. It felt old, wild in a disciplined way, responsive to truth perhaps, or to will stripped clean of fear. Lyra herself seemed startled by it, but she did not step back. The firelight deepened across her face, sharpening the calm fury in her expression until she looked less like a woman caught in a power struggle, and more like the force that had finally emerged when the struggle became unbearable. A warrior whispered, "Moon blood." Another hissed for silence, but it was too late. The word had entered the clearing. Seraphine heard it. Kyle heard it. Lyra heard it. And all three of them understood the danger immediately. Moonblood wasn't a title spoken. It referred to an old line, half history and half superstition. Wolves said to carry power that did not come from rank but from older covenantal things. Forest, moon, blood law before law became codified by packs and crowns. Most considered it myth, made useful for frightening children or sanctifying bloodlines. But the fire had bent, and the wolves had seen it. Seraphine recovered first. "Convenient," she said softly, but the softness could not conceal the new tension in her voice. "A miracle, just in time to justify chaos." Lyra's gaze stayed on the flame a moment longer, then lifted. "I didn't ask it to happen. No, Seraphine said. But you'll use it. The accusation would have worked on another night. On any other night, perhaps. The pack would have reached for the safer explanation, ambition dressed up as mystery. Kyle ended that possibility before it could root. She doesn't need justification from you, he said. He moved to her side again, and the fire leaned once more, less sharply this time, as if recognizing the line the two of them formed together and disapproving of how unstable it was. The council saw that too. The eldest among them, a woman who had been silent until now, finally stood. Age did not make her fragile, it made her impossible to rush. Enough, she said, and every voice died. The old laws do not account for this. The blood law binds the Luna. The Alpha's confession binds his word. And if the moon blood has awakened, she did not say if like she doubted it, she said it like she feared what certainty would require. Then the pack stands at the edge of something larger than succession. Kyle looked at her. Say what you mean. The old woman's gaze moved from him to Lyra, then to Seraphine. I mean the pack cannot resolve this by pretending it is one conflict. It is three, a political bond, a blood bond, and a power that may not answer to either. Seraphine spoke first. Then the answer is containment. Lyra's expression sharpened, dangerous. Kyle felt it in the bond before he heard the intake of several warriors who understood at once what containment meant. The elder turned to Seraphine. Perhaps, Kyle's voice cooled by a degree. No. The old woman looked at him without blinking. Then prepare for challenge, Alpha. Because if the pack cannot contain the instability will invite those beyond us to test whether you can. Kyle had already accepted that. But accepting something in the privacy of his mind and hearing it named before the council were different forms of commitment. Lyra heard it too. He felt the understanding move through her. War was no longer threat. It was logistics. Seraphine saw the same thing, and with the ruthless intelligence that made her terrifying, said, Then let it be known before dawn that the Alpha remains bound to his Luna, and that any threat to this territory will be met with blood. It was a masterful move. It forced Kyle into a trap. Accept publicly and preserve the image long enough to keep enemies uncertain, or reject publicly and invite immediate predation. He should have accepted. Every instinct trained by leadership told him so. Instead, he looked at Lyra. She met his gaze with fury, exhaustion, and the faint, dangerous light of awakened power moving behind both. If he accepted Seraphine's terms, even tactically, he would put Lyra back into silence in the very moment she had stepped out of it. He had done that once already. He would not do it again. No, he said. The grounds froze. Seraphine's control finally cracked in a visible line through her face. You would hand our enemies your throat. I would rather fight them honestly than rule this territory by burying what stands in front of me. The bond surged. Every wolf in the clearing felt it. And because they felt it, because some truths arrive before understanding can stop them, the pack saw what Kyle himself had only fully understood tonight. He was no longer merely attached to Lyra. He was already lost to her. That was the moment dominance changed shape. It was no longer the dominance of a king imposing order. It became the far more dangerous dominance of a man willing to reorder the world around a truth he had finally stopped denying. Lyra felt that realization too, and for the first time since he had found her in the forest, fear passed through the bond from her side. Not fear of him, fear of the scale of what he was prepared to do. He stepped closer, voice low enough that only she heard. Say you want me to stop. Her eyes lifted to his, bright with anger, and something much more fragile beneath it. And if I do, I stop. That answer shook her more than command ever could, because it meant the choice had moved. because it meant he was giving her the power to halt something he had already begun reshaping with his own hands. Her breath caught, the bond tightened, listening, and she did not say it. Chapter 16. The First Challenge. The horn sounded before dawn. Low, long, foreign, every wolf in the central grounds turned toward the eastern border as one. The sound rolled over the packlands with the heavy warning note that never meant curiosity and always meant test. Seraphine closed her eyes for half a second, as if the universe had proved her right too quickly even for satisfaction. When she opened them again, her gaze found Kyle with cold precision. They smelled it. Kyle did not answer, because he was already issuing orders. Scouts east, inner circle to arms. Border guards doubled. No one leaves central grounds without command. The pack sprang into motion because whatever else had fractured, training still held. Warriors moved fast, elders regrouped, messengers broke in every direction. Kyle turned to Lyra. "You stay here." She stared at him. "No." The answer came before he finished meaning the command. "Lyra, no." Her voice was lower now, but stronger, and the old deference had burned away completely. "You don't drag me into the center of this. Wake something in me your pack will fear. Tell the entire territory the truth, and then put me behind walls while you bleed for it." The bond surged wild approval from his side, sharper resistance from hers. He knew she was right. That didn't make it easier. Seraphine approached before he could answer, warriors falling aside for her because the mark on her throat still carried force even in fracture. "Take her to the inner keep," she said. "If the border challenge is as immediate as it sounds, the last thing this pack needs is an awakened unknown standing visible when fear is highest." Lyra's expression turned glacial. "Say containment to my face this time." Seraphine did not flinch. "I'm saying survival, and I'm hearing fear." Kyle stepped between them before the exchange could become something worse. "Enough. Lyra doesn't go anywhere under guard." Seraphine's eyes narrowed. "Then you are choosing risk again." Kyle looked at her directly. "I have not stopped." He turned back to Lyra. "You stay near me." She held his gaze for a long beat, then nodded once. Not obedience. A negotiated refusal to vanish. That was the best he was getting. The Eastern scouts returned faster than expected, which told Kyle everything before they opened their mouths. A fast return meant the enemy had not bothered with subtlety. A border pack delegation had crossed the line openly. Not raiders, not yet. A formal challenge party. The wolves gathered in the central grounds understood the significance immediately. This was not just opportunism, this was theater. Rivals had smelled weakness and decided they wanted witnesses when they tested the throne. Kyle welcomed them inside the boundary. Several elders protested at once. He overruled all of them. If they came to smell blood, he said, "Let them do it where I can see their faces." That was the sort of answer that reminded the pack why he had ruled uncontested so long. Crisis had a way of burning hesitation out of him until only the blade remained. The challenge party arrived with sunrise. They were led by Alpha Tarek of the Stone Hollow borderlands, a man Kyle knew too well, broad, silver-eyed, disciplined in the public way dangerous men often are, his politeness always balanced just above insult. Behind him came 6 wolves and 1 elder woman whose function was obvious. Witness, record, carry the truth home with ceremonial weight. Tarek took in the grounds quickly. The council still assembled, warriors armed, Seraphine visibly marked, Lyra visible beside Kyle, and smiled the way predators do when they enter a room and realize the meal has already been wounded. "Alpha King," he said, bowing just enough to avoid open offense. "We heard your celebration carried far." Kael's expression did not shift. You crossed my border at dawn to comment on noise. Tarek's eyes moved, just briefly, to Lyra. I crossed because I heard the noise change before the fires died. There it was. Challenge laid politely. Seraphine stepped forward before Kael could answer. Stone Hollow will remember its place. Tarek inclined his head to her with insulting smoothness. Luna. Then his gaze flicked once more toward Lyra. Unless the title is under discussion. The grounds tightened as one. Kael's voice dropped into iron. Choose your next words carefully. Tarek smiled again, smaller this time, because he had gotten what he came for, confirmation through reaction that the fracture was real. Then let me be plain, he said. Stone Hollow has no interest in your private arrangements. We are interested in whether your border remains defended by one throne or divided by 3 claims. Lyra felt the pack recoil from the phrasing. 3 claims. Alpha, Luna, something else. The awakened power within her stirred again, less like panic now and more like instinct offended by being named as commodity. Kael answered with lethal calm. You are looking at my border. Tarek's eyes returned to Lyra. Am I? That was the moment the first real test arrived. Not swords. Perception. If Kael denied her publicly now, he might regain strategic ground. If he acknowledged her, he widened the fracture in front of an enemy pack. The old Kael would have chosen the cleaner path. The man standing here now did not. Yes, he said. The word dropped into the grounds like judgment. You are looking at one of the reasons this territory still has a future. Tarek stilled. So did Seraphine. So did half the pack. Lyra felt the impact of it not through the wolves, but through the bond itself, which tightened so hard for one sharp second that her heart physically hurt. Tarek recovered first, because men like him always recover quickly enough to remain dangerous. Then perhaps your future is more unstable than rumor suggested. Kael took one step forward, and the entire challenge party adjusted unconsciously. That was what power looked like when it was clean. Perhaps, he said, but if you came here hoping weakness has made me slow, test that assumption with your body, not your mouth. The elder witness from Stone Hollow looked almost pleased now. This had become worth recording. Tarek's expression sharpened. Then grant ritual challenge. The grounds erupted in protest. Elders, warriors, Seraphine, all at once, because ritual challenge here, now at dawn after a public fracture, would give Stone Hollow exactly what it wanted. A spectacle that traveled beyond both packs before noon. Kael raised one hand. Silence snapped back down. He considered Tarek for a moment. The old instinct would have been to refuse and preserve structure. Instead, he said, accepted. The entire clearing went still. Lyra turned to him so sharply the bond nearly burned. What are you doing? Ending this quickly? That's not quick, she said. That's blood for politics. It's blood, so they stop thinking they can come for you. Then he looked away and addressed the grounds. Ritual circle. Witnesses only. Everything moved. Stone marked in the earth. Warriors clearing space. Elders arranging formal position. Seraphine standing rigid with fury she had no legal way to interrupt. Tarek removing his outer coat with the smoothness of a man who believed the fight itself might matter less than what it exposed. Lyra stood unmoving. The awakened power inside her sharpened with every beat of her pulse. He was doing this for the territory, for dominance, for message. And for her, that last truth frightened her more than the challenge itself, because if he bled publicly now in defense of what he had chosen to say aloud, the pack would never again be able to pretend she was incidental. The circle closed. Kael entered it. Tarek followed. Ritual law required no weapons and no shifting unless mutually agreed. This would be blood and bone, king against rival alpha in full witness before 2 packs, and a dawn already poisoned by rumor. The old woman from Stone Hollow began the formal invocation. Lyra barely heard it. The bond had gone razor-sharp, every line of Kyle's body transmitting through her with punishing clarity. She felt his focus settle, cold and exact. She felt the part of him that became most dangerous when stripped of every distraction. Tarek moved first, fast, disciplined. Kyle met him harder. The impact of the first strike cracked through the circle like split timber, and the pack exhaled as one. Tarek was strong, but Kyle fought as if something more intimate than pride had entered his bloodstream. Every movement was controlled brutality, every strike calculated to end the contest rather than impress the witnesses. That should have been enough. It wasn't. Because Tarek wasn't there to win by strength alone, he was there to expose fracture. "Does she watch all your battles this closely?" The words were for Lyra. Kyle hit him hard enough to drop him to one knee. "Speak to me," Kyle said, voice low and murderous, "or lose your teeth learning." Tarek rose, grinning red. There it is. And Lyra understood in the same instant Kyle did. This wasn't only about victory. It was about forcing public emotional reaction from the Alpha King, making him reveal whether his discipline held when Lyra was used as pressure point. Too late. The pack had already seen enough. Tarek came again, dirt and blood and strategy all over him. He drove Kyle backward by half a pace, then turned the line of his attack just enough that the next, feint opened toward Lyra's side of the circle. Warriors moved instantly, but Lyra's awakened power moved faster. The council fire from earlier was gone, yet the dawn light itself seemed to shiver. The earth under the ritual circle groaned, not breaking, but rising slightly, as though something beneath it had recognized threat and objected. Tarek faltered. That single falter gave Kyle the opening. His fist landed once, then again, then drove Tarek to the ground with enough force that no one mistook the outcome. When Kyle pinned him there, one hand at his throat, the ritual circle knew its winner before the old witness could speak the formal words. But the formal words came anyway. Stone Hollow yields. The pack exhaled. Kyle rose. Blood darkened his mouth. His knuckles were split. There was a cut at his brow and something harder in his eyes than before he entered the circle. He did not look at Tarek first. He looked at Lyra. The pack saw that too, every last one of them. That was the second law he broke that day. The first was choosing truth over appearance. The second was letting the pack witness what had become the center of his instinct. Tarek saw it from the ground and laughed again, though it hurt him. "You already lost," he said. "You just haven't counted the ways yet." Kyle turned back slowly. "Get out of my territory before I give the elders a lesson in how challenge law ends when I'm in a bad mood." Tarek rose, wiping blood from his mouth, and signaled his wolves. But before he turned, he looked once at Lyra. Not lust, not admiration, something more dangerous than either. Recognition. He had seen power, and now the world beyond the pack would hear of it. Lyra knew it. Seraphine knew it. Kyle knew it. Chapter 17. What awoke? The grounds did not settle after Stone Hollow left. If anything, the victory made the fracture clearer. Kyle had defended the pack. He had humiliated a rival. He had done what an alpha should do, and still the pack looked at Lyra as if dawn had risen around a different center. Because the ground had moved for her. Because the circle had faltered for her. Because every wolf present had felt the force that answered when threat moved too close. The old councilwoman who had named the threefold conflict earlier approached slowly once the challenge party vanished beyond the borderline. "It responds to protection," she said, looking at Lyra with neither reverence nor fear, only severe interest. Lyra, still trying to understand what she herself had done, said, "I didn't command anything." "No," the elder replied. "That is why it is dangerous." Seraphine had not. She stood apart from the others, cloak gathered close, mark visible. expression unreadable to anyone who did not understand ambition under pressure. Kyle understood it too well now. She had lost ground publicly. That did not mean she had lost the war. The smart enemy rarely fought hardest in the first battle. Kyle went to Lyra only after ensuring the grounds held. When he stopped before her, close enough to matter, the pack tried very hard not to look like it was watching. Lyra looked at the blood on his mouth before she looked at his eyes. "You shouldn't have accepted that challenge." His answer came easy because it was true. He would have pushed until I did. You could have ended it with command and taught the border packs that rumor is enough to rattle me. That frustrated her because it was reasonable. He saw it in the brief flicker across her expression. "You are making everything bigger," she said. He held her gaze. It was already bigger. We were the ones pretending otherwise. That old honesty again, brutal and late. Her eyes moved, just once, to the cut at his brow. "You're bleeding." "I've had worse, I know." The words came out quieter than she intended, and the knowledge in them settled between them with dangerous intimacy. She knew how he healed. She knew how pain sat on him. She knew him in ways that had no right to still matter after what he had done. Kyle heard it all in the single sentence. Before either of them could step too far into that silence, Seraphine approached. The grounds reacted to her like a held breath. She stopped at exactly the distance required to make this public without making it vulgar. "The council reconvenes at dusk," she said. "By then the border rumor will have traveled. By tomorrow night we will know who still stands with you and who stands with the law." Kyle looked at her. The law stood with silence too long. Seraphine's eyes sharpened. "The law stands with continuity. What stands with you now is desire." Lyra went still beside him. That was what Seraphine had chosen as her weapon now. Not merely legitimacy, but contempt. Reduce the bond to hunger. Reduce truth to weakness. Reduce Lyra to the wound that made a king irrational. Kyle answered before Lyra could. "You mistake obsession for blindness." It was a startling word, not because he had denied it, because he had named it without flinching. Seraphine heard it, and something very small and very real broke behind her eyes before she mastered herself again. "Then may it destroy you thoroughly." She turned and walked away, and this time more wolves followed her. Not many. Enough. Lines were becoming visible now. By midday the territory would know it was choosing between structures, not just loyalties. Lyra watched Seraphine leave, then said quietly, "You should not have said that." He looked at her. "Which part?" Her expression tightened. "The part where you made yourself easier to predict." Kyle almost smiled, but there was no room for softness in the shape of the day. "I said it because she already knew." The bond shifted again, not in response to Seraphine this time, from within Lyra. The elder noticed before Kyle did. "It grows when the truth sharpens," she murmured. Lyra looked at her. "What does?" The elder's face remained severe. "Whatever answered you this morning." Kyle heard the risk in the woman's tone. Not superstition, recognition, moon blood or no moon blood. If the pack began to believe Lyra held a form of power outside rank and law, then the political fracture would become spiritual too. Wolves would not merely choose sides, they would choose meanings. And meanings started wars faster than borders did. He made the decision at once. She does not remain here. Lyra's head turned sharply. "Excuse me?" He did not soften it. Dusk Council becomes a trap the moment enough wolves decide your presence is either miracle or threat. I won't have you surrounded by both. Your solution to danger is still to move me like an object. My solution is to keep you alive until I can break the rest of this cleanly. The answer struck her silent for one hard beat. Then she said, "You don't to break the world around me and call that care." Kyle took the blow because it was deserved. Then he said, "Come anyway." The bond tightened with the force of the choice he was handing her. She hated that he had started doing that. Hated it more because it worked. The elder woman intervened before pride could sharpen them both into stupidity. "He's right about one thing," she said. "By dusk, some will want to worship what awakened in you. Others will want it caged. Neither is safety." Lyra looked from the elder to Kyle and back again. "And where exactly do you plan to take me that the pack can't reach?" Kyle answered without hesitation. "The North Sanctuary. That changed everything." Even the elder's expression shifted. The North Sanctuary was older than the current pack, a place in the upper cliffs where law had once been made before the pack solidified around crown and territory. It was neutral ground in theory and dangerous ground in practice. Few wolves went there because old things were said to linger around it. Not ghosts, not nonsense, but older instincts and rituals that made rank feel flimsy. Lyra understood immediately what he was doing. He was not merely hiding her. He was taking her somewhere the awakened power might be understood before the pack tried to define it for her. The realization moved through the bond like heat, and that, perhaps more than anything else that day, made her afraid to trust. Chapter 18. The North Sanctuary. They left before noon with only 3 wolves besides them, the old councilwoman, because Kyle insisted he needed someone who understood what old law might make of awakened power. Dane, his most trusted war captain, because not every threat wore a pack face, and Mara, a quiet tracker whose loyalty belonged less to people than to truth, which made her useful in a day full of lies. The climb north stripped speech from them for a while. The sanctuary sat beyond the main hunting ridges, where the forest thinned into dark stone and cold wind. The path was narrow, cutting along ledges and broken terraces older than the pack markers below. By the time they reached the upper cliffs, the territory looked different from above, less like something governed and more like something borrowed. Lyra felt the power inside her shift again the higher they went. Not stronger exactly, more attentive, as if the place recognized what had awakened. Kyle noticed the way she touched the stone once in passing, fingers trailing across a weathered edge carved with symbols so old they no longer resembled language to ordinary eyes. "You feel it," he said. She did not deny it. "Yes." "What does it feel like?" Lyra searched for words and hated that he deserved any answer. "Like something that was listening before I ever knew how to speak." The old councilwoman, walking just behind them, made a sound low in her throat that might have been acknowledgement or worry. Then the old stories did not lie as much as we hoped. The sanctuary opened without announcement, less a building than a ring of stone and ruined archways set into the cliffside, facing a vast drop where the sky seemed too close and the forest below too far to matter. The place held no fire, yet it never felt cold in a normal way. It felt watched. Lyra stepped into the center and stopped. The force inside her answered immediately. The air changed. Not storming, not theatrical, just settling around her with the unmistakable sensation that something unseen had straightened to attention. Mara's hand drifted toward the knife at her thigh before she caught herself. Dane muttered something that sounded like an old prayer. Kyle did not move. He had already decided that if the sanctuary rejected Lyra, he would tear old law apart with his own hands before he let the pack cage her for it. The old woman moved to the inner ring of carved stone and placed her palm flat against it. "This place was built for recognition," she said. "Old blood, old promises. It does not create power. It reveals what was hidden." Lyra looked at her. "Then reveal it." There was no fear in the words now, only exhaustion, and beneath that, a fierce need to stop being the last person in the room to understand what she was becoming. The old woman nodded. "Stand at the center." Lyra did. Kyle stayed where he was, every instinct in him at war with the order not to interfere. The elder began to speak, not chanting, Not magic in the childish sense, but the old declarative language of blood law before Pax simplified it into ceremony. The words rolled across the sanctuary and seemed to sink into the stone itself. Nothing happened. Then everything did. The wind shifted first, circling inward instead of outward. The carved symbols around the ring darkened as if dampened from within. Lyra's breathing changed, deepening suddenly, and the bond between her and Kyle snapped into blinding clarity. He felt her, not just emotion, not just pain or anger or tension. Essence. It was like touching moonlit water with bloodied hands and realizing the water had always known your true name. Lyra gasped, not in fear, but in recognition so strong it hurt. The old woman's voice remained steady, though strain entered it now. Blood of old watch, blood of witness, blood that bends when truth is denied. Name yourself. Lyra's answer came without thought. Lyra Vale. The symbols flashed, white, not fire, not lightning. Something older and cleaner than either. Kyle took a step forward instinctively, but Dane caught his arm with enough force to stop him. If you break the circle now, you may break her with it. Kyle shook him off without violence, but he did not move again. He could not. Dane was right. The old woman spoke again. What answers you? Lyra's eyes closed. When she answered, her voice no longer sounded like it came from fear or injury, or even from the pack that had shaped her. It sounded like it came from somewhere the pack had forgotten. Witness. The word hit the sanctuary like impact. The carvings flared brighter. Mara actually stumbled backward. The elder woman exhaled hard, as though a truth she had hoped not to confirm had just risen and stood before them. Moonblood of witness, she said, almost to herself. Gods have mercy. Lyra's eyes opened. Kyle had never seen them like that. Still Lyra's, still fierce, still carrying all the damage and hardness of who she had become, but lit from somewhere deeper now, like the truth inside her had finally found a shape the world could not force smaller. The circle dimmed slowly, the wind loosened, and the sanctuary settled. Lyra remained standing, but when Kyle reached her this time, she did not stop him. His hand closed around her forearm, solid and warm and very human against everything else. Are you hurt? She looked at him strangely, almost as if his question came from very far away. Then some of the sharpness in her gaze gave way, and she said, No. The old woman approached with reverence held carefully inside discipline. You are witness blood, she said. Old law responded to truth through your line. That is why silence damages you more deeply than most wolves. That is why hidden fracture pulls at you until it bleeds. Lyra absorbed that in silence. Kyle understood what it meant faster than he wanted to. It meant he had not simply hurt a woman who loved him quietly. He had committed the one kind of violence her blood would always register most deeply, the violence of truth denied while power rearranged itself around the denial. The weight of that nearly drove him to his knees. Lyra saw the realization move through him. She felt it through the bond before his face could hide it. And to his surprise, that did not satisfy her. It wounded her all over again, because now he knew. And knowledge this late was its own cruelty. The old woman continued, because mercy was not the point of truth. Witness blood is rare because it is difficult for packs to tolerate. Structures built on silence eventually turn against it. Packs try to bury it, marry it into weaker lines, or turn it into myth. Lyra laughed once, sharply and without humor. So I was born to be inconvenient. No, Kyle said. Everyone looked at him. He didn't care. You were born to make lies expensive. The bond tightened so hard it almost hurt. Lyra looked away first, toward the vast drop beyond the sanctuary, because the words had reached too far in. Dane broke the silence next, practical as always. If Stone Hollow carries news of this, every border pack with ambition will move. Some will want alliance. Some will want proof. Some will want her dead before the pack can rally around what she is. Mara nodded once. And some inside our own territory will think the same. Seraphine. None of them said her name first. They didn't need to. Kyle said it anyway. She won't wait. The old woman's face hardened. No. She'll move before Dusk Council, not after. If she is as intelligent as she appears, she knows delay helps you more than it helps her now. Lyra looked back at them. Then we stopped reacting. The force in her voice was different now. Steadier, wider, impossible to mistake for the quiet endurance she had once lived inside. Kyle felt his own instincts answer it. How? Lyra stepped to the edge of the sanctuary and looked down over the territory spread beneath them. From here, the Packlands no longer resembled home or hierarchy. They resembled a body with arteries, boundaries, vulnerabilities. We go back before she's ready for us, she said. You stop defending what broke. You name what comes next. Kyle watched her profile against the sky, the wind moving through her hair, the old symbols at the sanctuary's edge, still faintly bright from what they had just revealed. She was changing. More precisely, she was becoming visible in the shape she had always been denied. And the most dangerous thing about it was not her power. It was the fact that he loved her most in the moments she turned toward war and made it look like truth. The realization struck him cleanly. He did not flinch from it. He had passed the point where denial could make him safer. Lyra turned then, perhaps feeling the exact instant the truth settled in him, and their gazes locked across the sanctuary. The bond did not spark wildly. It deepened, slow, terrible, certain. She saw it. He knew she did. And that, more than borders or rivals or councils, was what made the next breath dangerous. Because if she asked him now, in this place, what he felt, he would say it. And once said, it would change the war again. Chapter 19. The Return. They came down from the North Sanctuary before sunset, and the mountains seemed to know they were not returning as the same people who had climbed it. The wind that had moved cold and high across the old stones followed them part way down, carrying with it the strange hush that had settled after Lyra's awakening. By the time the Packlands came into view again, the sky had darkened into bruised gold, and smoke from the central fires lifted in rigid columns that looked less like warmth and more like warning. Kyle saw the change immediately. The outer sentries were doubled. No hunting parties moved freely through the lower groves. The central grounds had been reorganized with military precision, which told him Seraphine had not wasted a single hour. She had done exactly what he expected a dangerous Lunar to do. After losing ground publicly, she had turned uncertainty into structure and structure into loyalty. Dane, walking 2 paces behind, muttered, "She moved faster than most alphas would." She had reason, Kyle said. Lyra heard the answer and did not miss its meaning. Seraphine had been humiliated in front of the pack, but humiliation by itself did not make a leader dangerous. Being underestimated did. And Kyle had no intention of pretending the woman he had marked was foolish enough to break under pressure. As they crossed the lower ridge into full view of the central grounds, the first horn sounded. One note, long and hard. Every wolf on the grounds turned. The sight of Kyle returning with Lyra at his side struck the territory like a stone dropped into still water. The reaction spread in visible rings, warriors straightening, elders rising, younger wolves going very still as instinct warred with discipline. Seraphine stood at the center of the council ring, exactly where Kyle knew she would be, lit by firelight and shadow, the mark at her throat no longer a fresh wound, but a public weapon sharpened by use. She did not look relieved to see him. She looked prepared. That was worse. Kyle did not slow. Lyra matched him stride for stride, and that alone shifted the shape of the return. She was no longer following him into the center of danger. She was entering it beside him. The pack felt that. Seraphine felt it too. When they reached the council ring, she spoke before any elder could claim the moment. "You left as Alpha," she said, her voice carrying across the full grounds with polished control. "You return with a rival claim at your side, and an entire territory forced to wait while enemies scent weakness at our borders. Tell me, Kyle, should they call that leadership or obsession?" The question landed exactly as she intended. It offered the pack a safer interpretation for what they had seen and what they feared. If Kyle could be framed as unstable, then the structure could still be saved by removing his judgment from the center of it. Seraphine wasn't trying to win him back anymore. She was trying to win the pack. Kyle stepped into the ring without breaking eye contact. "Call it truth, and you save us time." A murmur moved through the assembled wolves, quickly suppressed. Seraphine's lips curved faintly, though there was no softness in it. Truth is useful when it stabilizes. This does the opposite. Lyra's power stirred before she spoke, a subtle pressure beneath the skin of the grounds, as though the territory itself had become more attentive since the sanctuary named what she was. "This was unstable before I ever said a word," she said. "You're asking everyone here to blame the fracture on the person who finally stood where you could see it." The words did more than answer Seraphine. They moved through the pack with the force of recognition, because enough wolves had already begun to suspect the same thing and had lacked only the courage, or the permission, to hear it said aloud. Seraphine turned her gaze on Lyra fully now. "You speak like someone who has already decided she belongs in the center of this." Lyra did not retreat from the challenge. "I speak like someone who spent too long being forced to live at the edge of it, that hit harder than a threat would have." Kyle felt it in the bond and in the pack around them, where silence tightened instead of loosening. Wolves understood rank. They understood public claim. What they rarely understood until it stood before them was the accumulated violence of being unseen. Seraphine saw that shift and changed tactics at once. "Then let us stop speaking like this is personal," she said, turning to the council and the gathered warriors. "The matter before the pack is simple. The Alpha King publicly marked a Luna to secure alliance and continuity. He then abandoned the Luna on the same night to pursue an awakened witness blood bond whose existence threatens law, succession, and border stability. This is no longer about hurt feelings, it is about whether the throne remains coherent." The grounds drew inward around the phrasing. She was good. Kyle had always known she was good. She had taken pain and stripped it into legal consequence, taken intimacy and turned it into a structural threat. It was exactly what a ruler built for continuity would do. And if Kyle answered her on those terms alone, Lyra would lose something all over again. He stepped forward. "Then speak the whole truth. I marked you to hold the pack together because I believed I could survive the cost of that choice. I was wrong." An elder to the left of the fire visibly winced, because Kyle's honesty had moved beyond strategic and entered sacrificial. Alpha law survived on image as much as force. Every public admission became a lever enemies could later use. Kyle kept going. "I did not return for Lyra because desire clouded me. I returned because the bond I ignored did not vanish when I chose to ignore it. It sharpened. It exposed everything I had buried beneath duty." Seraphine's composure finally cracked by a degree. "And the pack is supposed to admire that?" "No," he said. "The pack is supposed to survive me telling the truth before lies become law." That changed the energy again. Lyra could feel it everywhere now, in the ground, in the listening silence of the trees, in the sharpened attention of wolves who were no longer merely watching a dispute between an alpha and his Luna. They were watching the structure beneath their own lives being questioned aloud. And because her power had awakened in witness rather than concealment, the truth in the clearing did not simply land. It resonated. Several torches around the outer ring bent toward the center at the same time, their flames leaning as though the air itself had tilted. It lasted only a second, perhaps less, but every wolf saw it. Seraphine did too. Her gaze sharpened into something that no longer even tried to hide threat. "You brought that back here," she said to Kyle. Lyra answered before he could. "I came back because I refuse to spend my life being named the problem while everyone else builds around the lie." That landed with the full force of what she had become. Even Kyle felt it as impact, because now the pack was no longer merely hearing Lyra. They were beginning to orient around her, and orientation was the first step to allegiance. Seraphine saw it, Kyle saw her see it, and in the split second after that recognition passed, he knew her counterstrike was coming before she spoke. She turned to the council and said, "Then invoke the old safeguard." The grounds froze. Kyle's attention sharpened instantly. No, Seraphine did not look at him. The witness blood has awakened inside an unstable bond and a fractured throne. The old safeguard exists for exactly this reason. The eldest councilwoman went pale in a way Kyle had not thought possible for her. Dane swore under his breath. Mara's hand drifted to the hilt at her side. Lyra looked from face to face and understood only one thing at once. Everyone else knew what the safeguard was, and none of them liked it. "What safeguard?" she asked. No one answered quickly enough. Seraphine did. "The severance trial." The words entered the clearing like winter. Lyra held still, but the bond jolted so sharply through Kyle that he felt it physically in his chest. The old woman stepped forward at last, voice hard with age and anger. "That law hasn't been invoked in generations." "It exists," Seraphine said, "and it exists because witness blood tied to divided rule can destabilize entire territories. If the bond cannot be resolved politically, it is put to trial before old law. If it survives, the territory adapts. If it fails, the threat is removed." Kyle stepped forward so fast the council ring itself recoiled from the force of his presence. "You speak of her as if she were livestock brought to weighing." Seraphine's eyes locked on his. "I speak of her as if she were powerful enough to demand law instead of sentiment." The answer was clever enough to cut, because it gave Lyra importance while still trying to place her beneath structure. Kyle would have destroyed the idea there and then if the old woman had not spoken first. The severance trial requires consent of the Alpha, the Luna, the witness blood, and the council. Relief tried to move through Kyle. Then Seraphine said, "Then let her refuse it in front of the pack. Let everyone hear that she would rather leave this territory unstable than submit the bond to law." The trap closed with perfect elegance. If Lyra refused publicly, Seraphine could frame her as selfish power refusing accountability. If Lyra accepted, she entered a trial designed by old law to test whether the bond should survive at all. Kyle felt the shape of the trap in the bond before Lyra said anything. He turned slightly toward her, his voice low enough that only she heard. "You say no. I will carry the rest." Her gaze lifted to his, and the force of what he found there nearly undid him. She was not afraid of the trial itself. She was afraid of what refusing it would make the pack believe, because she understood them now, understood that witness without courage became another kind of silence. "I'm tired of being judged by what I avoid," she said quietly. The bond tightened. "No," he said. "It came too hard, too fast. The entire ring heard it. Seraphine's expression changed minutely because she had just won something even without the trial. The pack had heard the Alpha King reject procedure in defense of one woman. That alone would widen the fracture. Lyra looked at him, something fierce and wounded crossing through her gaze at once. "You don't get to command me out of the test just because it scares you." Kyle did not care who heard what came next. "It does more than scare me." Silence fell, deep, dangerous. And when he continued, the words came from too far inside him to be called tactical anymore. "It threatens the one thing I am no longer willing to lose." The confession hit the pack harder than a challenge horn. Seraphine closed her eyes for half a second. The old woman looked as if history itself had grown inconvenient. Lyra felt the truth of it through the bond, and nearly hated him for the timing, for the lateness, for the fact that he had waited until the world was burning to say what could have changed everything before blood and law got involved. But she did not step away. That was the part that terrified him most. She turned to the council. "Explain the trial." Kyle's voice dropped into iron. "Lyra," she did not look at him. "Explain it," the old woman answered, because old law does not wait politely for comfort. The severance trial was created when witness blood bonds threatened succession wars. The Alpha, the Lunar, and the witness stand before old law. Blood is called, truth is called, power is called. If the witness bond is false, it fractures. If it is real and stronger than the political claim around it, it survives and forces reordering. Lyra absorbed that in silence. "And if it survives?" she asked. The old woman's face hardened. "Then the pack cannot pretend it is anything else." Kyle knew what she was asking without needing it named. "And if it failed?" The old woman met her gaze directly. "Then the damage may break more than the bond." There it was. The cruelty beneath ritual. Old law did not merely observe truth. It extracted cost for daring to bring truth into power's center. Kyle looked at the council ring, the pack, the torches, the wolves who had once followed him without needing explanation. "I refuse it." Seraphine moved instantly. "Then the refusal is recorded." Lyra's power stirred hard enough that the stones under the fire pit cracked with a sound like bone under strain. Every wolf in the clearing looked at her. She stood in the center of it, eyes bright, spine straight, breathing controlled only by force, and when she spoke, her voice carried wider than it should have. "No," she said. This time the word was hers. Kyle turned sharply toward her. She finally looked at him fully, and what he saw there was unbearable because it contained love, fury, exhaustion, and the part of her that had learned too long ago that dignity means walking into the thing meant to define you and forcing it to speak honestly. "If this pack is going to hang my existence on a law," she said to him, "then let the law choke on the truth." The bond detonated through him. He had no language for what it did to hear her say it, and in the silence that followed, the entire territory understood the same thing. The trial would happen. Chapter 20. The Severance Trial. They took the old law path under moonrise. No one spoke above a murmur. The pack moved in solemn procession. Council first, then witnesses, then warriors, then the three at the center of it all. Seraphine marked and regal, Kyle silent and lethal, Lyra lit from within by something the night itself seemed unwilling to swallow. The trial ground lay beyond the pack's oldest boundary, below the sanctuary and deeper east, in a basin of pale stone where moonlight collected like water. The place predated crowns, predated titles, perhaps even predated the first wolves who thought binding themselves to territory was the same thing as owning it. The Severance Circle had no carved seating, no banners, no symbols of status beyond what blood itself would reveal. That was the point. Old law did not care what wolves called themselves when they wore crowns. It cared what survived witness. Kyle hated the place instantly, not because it frightened him, because it was honest in a way power rarely tolerated. The council ring formed around the pale basin. No one crossed into the circle except the three bound to the matter and the elder woman who would call the law. Seraphine entered first, every movement deliberate. She wore no cloak now. She wanted the mark visible, wanted the moon to catch on it, wanted the pack to remember that blood had already chosen publicly once. Lyra entered second. Her face gave away nothing easy. Kyle could feel the force moving inside her with increasing pressure, not wild but alert. The ground responded faintly beneath her steps, small vibrations through the pale stone that the untrained might have missed, and the old wolves definitely did not. Kyle entered last. He hated that too. It made him feel as though he was coming late into his own life. The old woman stood at the edge of the circle and opened her palm with a ritual blade. Blood fell onto the stone. Old law hears. The wind changed. The entire basin seemed to lean inward. Political bond stands, she said, turning toward Seraphine. Witness bond stands, and this time her eyes moved to Lyra and Kyle both. Claim of fracture is made, claim of truth is made. Let blood answer what law cannot soften. A shallow bowl of dark stone was placed at the center. Seraphine bled first, a clean line across her palm, blood falling steady and controlled. Kyle bled second. His blood struck the bowl harder. Lyra stepped last. When her blood hit the stone, the basin reacted. Moonlight thickened, no metaphor, no illusion. The pale surface of the circle took on a brighter sheen, as though the night had inhaled. A wave moved through the gathered wolves. The old woman's expression gave away nothing, but Kyle saw the tension in the tendons of her hand. The law had just answered before the first question was even asked. Seraphine saw it too, and for the first time there was something close to urgency in the way she stood. The old woman raised both hands. Truth first. Alpha King Kyle Draven, which bond do you deny? The trial was cruel by design. It did not ask what he loved, it asked what he would cut. Kyle looked at Seraphine first because justice required it. She held his gaze with unflinching strength, and he saw in her not villainy, not weakness, but a woman standing inside the destruction of her future and refusing to collapse simply because a man had failed her publicly. Then he looked at Lyra. The world narrowed. He could not answer around her. I deny the lie that the political bond settled what already existed. The basin flashed. The old woman did not react. Luna Seraphine of the Northern Ridge. Which claim do you deny? Seraphine's voice did not shake. I deny that an unmarked witness bond can stand above a marked lunar bond and still leave a pack whole. The basin pulsed again, but this time the reaction was different. Tight, resistant, neither full acceptance nor rejection. The old woman turned to Lyra last. Witness blood, Lyra Vale. Which bond do you deny? Every wolf in the basin leaned into the silence. Lyra looked at Kyle, then at Seraphine, then at the moonlit bowl between them. When she spoke, her voice carried farther than the circle should have allowed. I deny the belief that truth should always come after power. The basin exploded with light. Wolves recoiled. Several fell back a step. Even the warriors at the outer ring broke discipline for the first time that night. Kyle felt the blast through the bond like something sacred and furious had just risen to its feet. The old woman's voice cut through the shock. Second witness, let power answer. Seraphine moved first. Her lunar mark burned dark, and the basin responded by lifting a narrow ring of shadow around her, structured and elegant and lethal in the way political power always wants to be. It did not attack. It enclosed. It sought to define space, to create center, to say this belongs here and that does not. Lyra felt its intent before it reached her. Then her own power rose. Moonlight did not enclose, it widened. It moved like water, and truth had remembered they belonged to the same God. The pale force spread beneath her feet and bent toward the shadow ring without striking it directly. Instead, it revealed it, showed every wolf present the difference between law used to contain and witness used to expose. The ring around Seraphine strained. Kyle understood with sudden clarity that this was the true nature of the conflict. Seraphine's power organized. Lyra's revealed. One made structures, the other made structures tell on themselves. No wonder packs feared witness blood. The old woman's voice came again, harder now, because the trial had entered dangerous territory. Final witness, let the bonds answer each other. Kale felt it before it happened, the political mark at Seraphine's throat, and the witness bond between him and Lyra lit at the same time, two currents moving through one body and refusing to remain separate. Pain tore through him. He stayed standing. Seraphine's breath broke sharply as the marked bond pulled at her from one side and the law's demand pulled at her from the other. Lyra swayed once, and Kyle moved instinctively, but the old woman shouted, "Do not touch her." He stopped by violence to himself. The bond between him and Lyra surged, and this time the basin did not merely reflect it, it recognized it. Moonlight struck upward in a narrow column that surrounded them both, not touching, not claiming, but holding them in witness no law could reduce. Seraphine cried out then, the first real sound of pain she had made all night, because the truth had finally become unbearable. The marked political bond existed, but it did not sit at the center of him. The witness bond did. The basin answered. The shadow ring around Seraphine cracked, not vanished, cracked. The sound ran through the basin like old law itself splitting open. The old woman's voice carried over the shock. The witness bond stands. No one in the pack would ever forget that sentence. Kyle felt the moment it became history. But the trial was not finished, because old law did not reveal truth without extracting cost. The basin flashed again, harder this time, and the force hit Lyra directly. She dropped to one knee. Kyle broke the rule instantly and crossed to her. The old woman shouted something, but he did not hear it. He was already there, already catching her before the second strike of power could drive her fully down. Moonlight burned across his skin the moment he touched her. Pain flashed through him, sharp enough to blind, but he did not let go. Lyra looked up at him, stunned and furious all at once. "You idiot!" He would have laughed if terror had not hollowed him out. Later, the basin roared. The old woman's voice cut through it again, no longer ceremonial now, but alarmed. "If you remain inside the final witness together, old law will bind what it has recognized." Kyle looked at Lyra. She understood at once. So did Seraphine. The final witness was no longer a test. It was a threshold. If he stayed holding Lyra inside the law's answer, the bond would not remain theoretical or hidden or even deniable. Old law would mark its own recognition across the territory, and there would be no political way to contain the fallout. War then, total, immediate. Lyra knew it, and because she knew it, because even now she was still trying to save him from the scale of what choosing her would cost, she said, "Let go." The bond between them tightened so violently it hurt to breathe. Kyle looked at her face, lit by moonlight and pain and witness, and all the things he had missed until it was nearly too late. He had spent too long choosing around the truth. He was done. No, the word came out like a vow. He held her tighter. The basin answered. Moonlight crashed upward in a blinding ring that swept across the entire trial ground, forcing every wolf present to their knees, except the three standing inside its center. Seraphine stared at them with devastation too controlled to be called collapse. The old woman closed her eyes as though she had just watched history abandon comfort and choose truth instead. And the law marked them, not on skin, worse, across witness. Every wolf in the basin felt it. The Alpha King belonged first to the bond he had denied. The territory knew, the law knew, The pack knew. There would be no taking it back now. Chapter 21. After the law, the trial ground never recovered its old silence. Even after the moonlight dimmed and the basin went dark, the place remained altered, as though old law had made a decision, and the stone itself would not forgive being used again for smaller matters. Lyra was still in Kyle's arms when the final light faded. She realized it first, then the entire pack did, and because what had just happened was too large to fit into embarrassment, too public to be folded back into modesty, too sacred to be treated like accident, no one looked away. Kyle lowered her carefully to her feet, but did not step back immediately. The bond between them no longer felt like pain wrapped around denial. It felt like a living thing given shape. Lyra lifted her gaze to him, and for one long, brutal, private second the pack disappeared. "Do you understand what you've done?" she asked. He held her eyes. "Yes." "You destroyed the last clean way out." "Yes." Her breath caught, and he knew she had wanted him to hesitate. He couldn't. Not anymore. Seraphine stepped forward before the moment could become something smaller. Her face had regained its composure, but the cost of doing so was visible now. Her voice, when it came, had sharpened into something terrible in its grace. "Then let the pack hear it clearly," she said. "The Alpha has broken the protective priority of lunar law inside Old Witness. The political bond stands but no longer holds central claim. The witness bond has been recognized before Council, before Border Witness, before Old Law, and before the pack." She turned toward the assembled wolves. "What comes next," she said, "is not reconciliation." No one argued, because they knew she was right. Kyle stepped beside Lyra and faced the pack. "What comes next is reordering." That was the gentlest word he could have chosen for the shape of the war about to arrive. It changed nothing. An elder rose unsteadily from his knees. "You ask the pack to survive a public lunar fracture, a witnessed old law bond, and the certainty of border challenge all at once." Kyle did not look away. "I ask the pack to survive the truth." Lyra felt the force of that and hated how much it mattered, because now he was saying what she had once begged for in silence, and he was saying it in a world already burning. The old woman from the sanctuary stepped forward. "Then hear mine as well," she said. "Witness blood answered the trial and survived. Old law has spoken. Any wolf who now moves to cage, silence, or remove Lyra Vale stands against law older than the crown." That mattered. More than Kyle's confession to half the wolves present, because it gave Lyra something stronger than his protection, legitimacy outside him. Seraphine heard it too, and Kyle saw the precise instant she understood the battlefield had changed. Lyra could no longer be dismissed as secret weakness. She had become a legal and spiritual force the pack would have to account for, which meant Seraphine's next move would not be crude attack, it would be coalition, power gathering around fear. Chapter 22. They gave the pack until dawn to regroup. It was not enough. It was all they had. The central grounds emptied in disciplined waves, but the silence left behind was anything but peaceful. Orders moved, messengers rode, outer sentries tripled, elders split into visible factions. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the knowledge that every neighboring territory would soon hear enough truth to make decisions of its own. For the first time since the trial, Kyle and Lyra found themselves briefly alone in the inner stone terrace above the council grounds, a place neither fully private nor fully public, which felt fitting given what had become of them. Lyra stood with both hands braced on the terrace wall, looking out over the sleeping and waking pieces of the pack she had just changed forever. Kyle stopped beside her, close enough that the bond acknowledged him instantly. Neither spoke at first. It was Lyra who broke the silence. "I should hate you more than I do." The words were quiet, stripped of performance. Kyle absorbed them the way he had learned to absorb blows in childhood, by not pretending they weren't deserved. You should. She turned her head slightly. Moonlight and dying firelight cut across her face in alternating bands of softness and severity. That isn't an answer. No, he said. It's a confession. The bond tightened. She looked away again, and when she spoke next, her voice carried more exhaustion than anger. You keep doing that, saying the right thing after the wrong time. The truth of it nearly hollowed him out. He stepped closer, but not enough to crowd. Then let me say this without pretending timing saves me. I loved you before I understood it. I understood it after I had already done the one thing that could make hearing it useless. The words landed between them with enough weight to bruise. Lyra closed her eyes once. That hurt him more than if she had slapped him, because she had imagined those words before. She had needed them before, and now that she finally had them, they came wrapped in ruin. When she opened her eyes, they were bright with something she would never call fragility. Do you know what the cruelest part is? He waited. I believe you. The confession moved through him like a blade. Lyra's laugh came once sharp and tired. I believe you, and it changes nothing that should matter first. It changes me, he said. Her gaze cut to him. You are not the first thing I should be asked to trust. No. The answer came fast because anything else would have been insult added to damage. She watched him for a long moment, and the bond between them deepened again, not into ease, not into forgiveness, but into the unbearable intimacy of being known too clearly after the point where clarity could save anyone from consequence. Then she said the thing that mattered most. If I stand with you tomorrow, it is not because I've forgotten what you did. He nodded once. I know. It is because I will not let them use my pain as a weapon against me. That almost made him smile, though there was no joy in it. That sounds like you. Her expression sharpened. And if you ever use what exists between us to control me, I will walk through whatever bond old law gave us and burn your throne from the inside. At last something fierce and terrible inside him answered with recognition so complete it felt like devotion. That, he said quietly, also sounds like you. The bond tightened, and for the first time since the marking, Lyra's mouth almost curved for real. Almost. It was enough. Below them a horn sounded once, short, urgent, no more private moments. Dawn had finished its work. Chapter 23. By sunrise, the territory had chosen motion over denial, not resolution. That was too much to hope for in a single night. But the shape of the future had become visible, and once visible, it could not be forced small again. Seraphine stood before the Eastern warriors with a cluster of elders and border captains around her, already rebuilding legitimacy through military clarity and public competence. She had lost central claim over Kyle's deepest bond, but she had not lost intelligence, ambition, or the ability to make fear loyal. Kyle saw at once that she was becoming something even more dangerous than a rejected Luna. She was becoming a rival power center, and Lyra saw it too. Across the central grounds, the old sanctuary elder stood with several wolves who had witnessed the law's recognition, their posture uncertain but fixed in her direction. No one called them followers yet. That word would come later, after enough days and enough decisions. For now they were simply wolves who had seen truth answer to her, and could no longer force themselves to pretend it meant nothing. Kyle looked across the grounds and understood what the pack had become overnight. Not broken, split into futures. One built around continuity sharpened by Seraphine, one built around truth awakened by Lyra. And at the center of the fracture stood him, the man foolish enough to think he could control both law and longing until they agreed to obey him. No more. He walked into the center of the grounds and let both sides watch him choose how to stand. Not with Seraphine, not in front of Lyra, between neither and both. When he spoke, he made sure the entire territory heard. From this dawn forward, he said, the pack does not bury truth for the sake of image. Lunar law remains standing. Border alliances remain under review. Witness law stands recognized. No wolf raises hand, fang, or order against Lyra Vale under pain of crown judgment. That was the public law. Then he continued, and no wolf mistakes that protection for ownership. She stands by her own right. That changed everything again, because it gave Lyra legitimacy without swallowing her into his power. She felt it through the bond immediately. Felt, too, how difficult it had been for him to understand that love offered as possession would only repeat the first violence. Seraphine heard it and inclined her head once, a movement so small only the most attentive wolves would read its meaning. She had lost one battle. She had no intention of losing the whole war. If Lyra now stood with legal protection and awakened power, Seraphine would adapt by becoming the champion of order itself. Kyle almost admired her for that. Almost. Lyra stepped into the light then, not because he had asked her to and not because the pack was ready. Because she was. The grounds shifted around the simple fact of her movement. She looked first at the wolves who feared her, then at the wolves who were already half prepared to make her symbol, and finally at Kyle. Her voice, when it came, carried farther than it should have needed to. "I will not be your miracle," she said. That cut off the dangerous hope rising in some faces. "I will not be your excuse either," she continued. "I am not here to make this pack feel chosen by the moon. I am here because silence failed, and because every structure built on silence eventually breaks." The words moved through them all. Even Seraphine listened, especially Seraphine. Lyra's gaze shifted across the gathered wolves, and the force within her answered the truth she was speaking, subtle enough not to frighten, clear enough that no one could doubt it. The morning light brightened around the central stones, not unnaturally, but with the unmistakable sense that the territory itself had leaned in to hear. "If you stand with me," she said, "then stand with truth when it costs you something. If you stand against me, do it openly. I am done living inside other people's shadows." That was the moment the pack stopped seeing her as aftermath. She became future, not settled future, not safe future, but real enough to choose. A warrior from the Eastern Ring stepped forward first and bent his head, not deeply enough to kneel, not lightly enough to be casual. A second wolf followed, then a third. It was not mass allegiance. It was something more dangerous to the old order. It was the beginning of one. Seraphine watched all of it with eyes that had gone very still. When she finally spoke, it was not to Kyle, it was to Lyra. "Then let us be honest with each other," she said. "This does not end with law. It begins there." Lyra held her gaze without flinching. "I know." No pretense remained between them now, no polite fiction that this could be healed into simplicity. Seraphine would not fade into a discarded rival, and Lyra would not retreat into chosen silence. They had both stepped too far into themselves for that. Kyle saw it and understood that the future would not be built by romance alone. It would be built by war, law, power, and the question of whether love was strong enough to survive being made public before it had ever been allowed to grow safely in private. The bond between him and Lyra tightened, steady, no longer pleading, no longer denied. It carried no promise of ease, only truth. He looked at her across the grounds, across wolves and law and dawn and consequences, and this time he did not look away. She didn't either. That mattered more than any vow he could have made. The eastern horn sounded again then, but this time it was not challenge. It was news. A scout came hard through the lower path, breath rough, face set with a kind of urgency that makes entire territories stop pretending they have time. He dropped to one knee before the central ring. "Border smoke," he said. "3 territories. Stone Hollow isn't waiting. Northern Ridge banners are moving with them." Seraphine's face changed first. Not shock, recognition. She knew those banners. knew what it meant that her own bloodline had moved before the pack had formally settled its fracture. Kyle understood the rest at once. They were not being tested anymore. They were being invited into war. The pack reacted exactly as a living thing reacts when the wound it has ignored becomes a blade at the throat. Warriors shifted, orders half-formed. Fear and adrenaline moved in equal measure. And through all of it, Lyra stood very still. The power inside her rose once more, no longer uncertain, no longer awakening, ready. Kyle looked at her and understood the shape of the real future at last. He had not merely chosen the woman he should have chosen first. He had chosen the fire at the center of a war that was only just beginning. And this time, he did not mistake that for tragedy. He stepped to her side, not ahead, not behind. Beside, the pack saw it. The rival banners would soon see it. Lyra turned her head slightly toward him, the faintest edge of something fierce moving through her expression. "This is your fault," she said. The words were dry enough that, under other circumstances, they might almost have been humor. Kyle's mouth shifted with the shadow of a response. A long list. Her gaze returned to the horizon where smoke had begun to stain the morning. "Then start earning your way off it." The bond tightened, deepened, accepted the shape of the war to come without pretending it would be gentle. Kyle looked at the rising smoke, at Seraphine standing like a sharpened law on one side, at Lyra bright with witness and danger on the other, at a pack that would either transform under pressure or break beneath it. Then he said the only honest thing left, "Good," because the clean ending had died the night he marked the wrong woman. What remained was larger, harder, and far more alive. The Alpha had broken his own law. The Luna had become a rival crown. The witness blood had awakened. And the world beyond their territory had finally smelled exactly what they were becoming. War, love, truth, power. None of it finished, all of it beginning.